Hi everybody, this is Wahib from Algiers Black Pearl. As promised before, we're doing this special coverage as a part of the ICFG program, covering the foreign policy of the US Department of State. And we chose the subject of environmental issues and specifically climate change. Here I have with me the economic officer of the US Embassy in Algiers, Andrew Lederman. Andrew, welcome and thank you for accepting the invitation.
Thank you very much for having me.
Would you like to, start by introducing yourself or what you do exactly, what are you working on?
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Andrew Lederman. I'm the economic officer here. I have been here since August of 2020. I've worked for the State Department for 12 years. I've served previously in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, Prague, Czech Republic, Washington, and here, covering a variety of issues. But here I focus on a number of economic issues, including the environment and climate. As you can imagine, climate is one of the top foreign policy issues for the Biden-Harris administration, so there's a lot of work for us to do.
I think more than ever, climate change has become an issue that is very hard to ignore. And President Biden has promised a sustainable future. How does this affect the State Department activities?
So every administration comes in with their series of priorities, and we figure out how to take those priorities and implement them and put them into programs that we're already doing. So for example, when it comes to climate, there are a series of particular initiatives that the administration is trying to push around the world. First and foremost is implementing the Paris Accords, which means a 1.5 degree Celsius reduction in the overall temperature around the world, and encouraging every country to create national goals to meet that objective.
And how does that translate into practical activities on the ground?
So we work very closely both with the Algerian government, but also other embassies, the UN, and others who are here in Algeria helping the Algerian government on issues related to climate. So every government in every country has its specialty. The Germans, for example, are very involved in Algeria's climate policies, but we as the US have some particular skills and backgrounds that we can help us. So in particular, right now, we're working with the Algerians on creating a more efficient emissions monitoring system, which is something that they need in order to be able to determine if they're meeting their goals as part of the Paris Protocol. So that is something we have a lot of experience with in the United States as a hydrocarbon producer to help other countries implement their own programs.
So in the countries where you served, or maybe other countries that you will be serving in the future, or at least where in the countries where the State Department's activities are taking place, do you think that there is a lack of awareness when it comes to climate change? And do you personally think that there should be more initiatives, more campaigns to allow people to understand the great risks of such issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is something, as you mentioned, it is both hard to ignore, but also it is hard to sometimes comprehend, where we talk about what the potential eventual impact of climate change will be is something that we don't necessarily tangibly feel in our day-to-day. It may be slightly hotter that year, or there may be less rainfall, or maybe there's even more snow, or it's colder. All of these are effects of climate change, and they have the long-term negative impacts on the world. And so it can be difficult for people to be able to visualize what all of these different priorities and initiatives are going towards. So it is important for us to be able to explain why what we're doing is so important. That is something that is important to the work that we do in everything as diplomats. It sometimes can be hard to explain why we're doing what we're doing, what our priorities are, and what impact they have. But one overall emphasis of the Biden-Harris administration is a foreign policy for the middle class. So really what that means is taking actions that have impacts on all Americans, benefits for all Americans, or taking steps to mitigate issues for all Americans, not just corporate corporations or not
Right.
just more wealthy people. It really, their foreign policy views are with a view to making life better for everyone.
What are some of the examples of the maybe particular behaviors or activities, or you think people should change in themselves in order to help to contribute positively to this great
So
issue?
there are little things. I know, I believe I recently learned that Algeria goes through something like 7,000 plastic bags every
Right.
year, and you get a plastic bag for every sort of piece of fruit you get at the fruit stand. And so bringing your own bags or reusing bags, small things so we don't have to make more plastic, is important.
Right.
Recycling, there is a small recycling community here in Algeria, but we are trying to support a culture of recycling, both for economic reasons, that can be helpful to people and there's economic opportunity in recycling, but it's also good for the environment and the climate.
Such as startups, for example.
Exactly. Recently in Blida,
Yeah.
who I believe has received embassy funding in the past, is a good example. And their model is great because it connects people who can pick up bottles or cans or whatever, find those, and then bring them to recycling centers to get paid. So there's an economic incentive in doing this too. So it really is a way to sort of encourage an environmentally friendly behavior that also has economic impact.
Do you try to identify annually or occasionally what are the effects of climate change that are taking place in the world? Algeria, for example, last year had series of fires in the forests, and not only in Algeria, it happened also in the US. Lots of experts, they were saying that this is the effect of climate change. But if we look at the public discourse or the mainstream media here or there or wherever in the world, there isn't much talk about that. They think they're just talking about people probably who made these fires, and so you feel like there is some lack of awareness. Do you try to identify as a State Department, identify the causes, the effects of climate change, and help also probably other governments to understand this issue?
So the US government has a number of agencies that work on this, whether it's the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Energy, other parts of our government where we have scientists who work on these things and do put out information every year on the rise in the temperature of the oceans, the percentage of forests that have been cut down in the previous year, desertification, this sort of thing. So we at the department take that information and use that to explain why we are going around the world advocating for measures to mitigate climate change. So another recent initiative of this administration in collaboration with the EU is something called the Global Methane Pledge. And that is to reduce overall methane emissions around the world. Algeria is...
Interesting. Is this taking place already?
We have just launched the pledge at the last COP, the last Committee of Parties for Climate Change Discussions in Scotland last November. We launched the pledge. And so we are going around the world getting countries to commit to helping reduce their methane emissions. We're not at a point where we're saying, you, Algeria, need to reduce your emissions by X percent. But we're at this point looking for a political commitment to seek ways to cut emissions of methane. And so that's something we're trying to advocate here with the Algerian government in collaboration with our EU colleagues. And that's something that we as the United States, again, as an oil and gas producer, have a lot of experience with. And we can bring that technical knowledge here to help the Algerian government deal with it.
Do you think there is a bright future for this type of discussions? Do you come to agreements with your counterparts?
I mean, I think the Algerian side understands very clearly the challenges posed by climate change. Every country has its limitations and its challenges, whether it's technical knowledge, financial ability to take what can be sometimes very upfront costly expenses. In the long term, it will generally yield benefits, but upfront it could be expensive. And so we're discussing with them how we can work together to sort of move past some of these initial concerns and get them to yes.
Okay. So my last section for this interview, I want to talk about the political disputes that exist within the political spectrum in the United States government. And so as since there are some disagreements maybe between how the Republican Party views climate change and how the Democrats views climate change, when there is a shift of administration, how, as a State Department employee, how do you deal with the change of policies or views?
So this is my third president that I'm working for. So I've seen changes go back and forth, and changes can be big and they can be small.
Could you explain to which extent when you say big, small?
Sure. So, for example, on climate change, the last administration decided not to participate in the Paris process, not to go to the COP meetings, and to take a much more backseat approach to the issue. And so you saw that come out when it came into the talking points that were sent to us to deliver to our colleagues here in Algiers and elsewhere about what role we're taking. And then when the Biden-Harris administration came in, that flipped. And you see this across a number of policy realms, is when there's a certain policy priority or a change, you will see sort of a directive come from Washington to say, you have your list of issues that you talk to your counterparts about every day. Here are some top line, our highest priorities that we'd like to have everybody talk about around the world. And so you will see that happen often. To me personally, even if there are changes in approach to a lot of our foreign policy priorities, the underlying issues are often the same, or the difference is a very small spectrum. So you see the difference in approach, you see the difference in what we may care about more versus other things. And I'm not talking about your sort of most controversial foreign policy topics, but so many things that we do, you will see them change slightly. But it's not a way that you would feel very conflicted about it.
Okay. So my last question for you is regarding the interest of State Department. How do you deal with a situation when different interests intersect? Let's say, for example, environmental issues against or intersecting with, for example, the interest of American companies. I'm talking about energy companies here. How do you deal with this?
I mean, we're seeing this right now following the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the impact that has had on global energy prices, and how dealing with the immediate issue conflicts with our long-term climate goals. And that is something that we really do have to deal with and think through every day at the State Department. We have long-term goals, want to make long-term change, but we still live in today and have to deal with today's problems. So it is a real tension when you want to make sure that your partners have energy security at a time when they're facing potential military action, while at the same time not doubling down on those energy sources as you move towards a more sustainable energy future. So there's a phrase that we like to use, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. And so you can talk about securing energy right now and making sure that in the short term our partners have the energy they need, especially as we're thankfully emerging from the cold winter months. But at the same time, begin the discussions about long-term transition away from fossil fuels to more sustainable, renewable energies, because those energies will not necessarily need to be reliant on some actors that we are in conflict with at the moment, and you will be more independent. So I think that's a really good example of how you have to deal with some of these tensions. But you think through, what do I need to do today? But also, how can I make that change 6 months, 1 year, 5 years down the road?
Okay, yeah, well understood. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's it for this interview, guys. If you have any other questions, please put them below in the comments. Take care.